more nerves about the situation, one way that you can get some hours in and kind of, I guess, ease your way into it is to do some private tutoring. And so maybe having a whole class of 6, 8, 10 students may be a little overwhelming at first, and maybe you want to start off a little bit slower. But those private tutoring um, opportunities that you could get, those are a good way to kind of break the ice on doing some teaching. It's just one-on-one usually, so it's a smaller environment. And so that kind of takes some of that pressure off, I think, as well. Um, so that's also something that you could do. And the third tip that I will give is just to be prepared. And I always say over prepare. So for my first few lessons that I made when I was first getting started, I really was meticulous in my planning. I really thought about the timing a lot, and even if I messed that up, I would always have extra. I would underestimate how long something would take, or overestimate, I guess. Essentially, if I thought in my head that I had an activity that would take 15 minutes, I would plan that maybe it will only take 10 minutes, so that I would have enough material that I thought would more than cover the time that I was going to teach. Because as a new teacher, I think it's harder to think off the top of your head. So as you become more experienced and you teach certain topics more often, you just kind of have a library of things in your head that you can extend with, or activities that you can go to that you know might work. But as a new teacher, you haven't built that repertoire of things that you can just recall in your head. So I think over preparing, having more exercises than you think you might need just in case, that takes that pressure off. Because I think one of the worst things and one of the most anxious moments is when you get to the end of a class and you still have 15 minutes left and you're like, oh no, I don't know what to do. I have no more of my plan. And so I at all costs wanted to avoid that situation. And so that's what I did. Good question to start us off. Thank you. All right, Sarah, I see that you've raised your hand. Would you like to go ahead and ask a question?
Absolutely. Thank you, Quentin. So I started my practicum and I'm doing private tutoring. And so I feel like I'm in a place that's a little difficult for me. The girls that I'm tutoring they've learned English in Mandarin, so not in English. So they're really great with writing and they're really great with reading, but they're not as great with speaking it. So I feel like when I'm developing my lesson plans, I might be making it a little bit too difficult for them. I think I probably need some guidance on what am I trying to say here? I'm sorry about that. I think I need some guidance with how to get them talking and understanding what I'm saying without having to like type into a converter and maybe other things I can do better.
Okay. Yeah, 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 absolutely. And I think that that's something that I've ran into, and I think is pretty common with language learning. I think unless you have an opportunity to practice spoken and listening, especially spoken, even with listening, we can watch a movie sometimes that's been dubbed in another language to get some listening practice. But I feel like the speaking, unless you're actually speaking to someone, there's not a real way to enhance that as well, unless they're working with a tutor or someone that they can speak with. And so I think what we some things that you might be able to do. Do you use a lot of instructional TPR when you're giving instructions and things of that nature? So like when you're telling them what to do and things like that, do you do a lot of instructional where you're kind of almost showing them what you want them to do, um, with your hands or with actions, or
Yeah,
modeling that behavior?
I use pictures and I use my hands to describe things. Sometimes I'll give them an example. Yeah. I wonder if I talk too fast is one thing I've kind of recognized, but I do a lot of hand talking and then I'll post like pull up actual visuals of what we're talking about to help explain it. So I
Yeah.
like the TPR.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you're on a good track with that. I think one thing that has been helpful in my classes, because the same issue happens with a lot of the classes that I've been helping out with My Culture Connect and with Luke with teaching, is the speaking skills are usually the lowest of the different language skills. And so one thing that we started doing, especially for our lower level classes, is to have a really good example of whatever discussion or conversation you want to have. And by that I mean, like, even so much, like, let's say we're talking about like activities or what you did last weekend for a simple past tense. Having a good example of what that dialogue looks like that will allow the students to kind of plug and play, so they will know that here's the sentence structure we're working with. What did you do last Saturday? And then know that they can respond, I went to the park, or I went to the mall. And then having that bank of options where here is what you plug and play with. And now we're just going to practice saying the sentences and putting in different responses, but using the same sentence structure. That might help them at least start to get the ball rolling on some speaking. The other thing that I've tried to do too, especially in the beginning of classes, because I think sometimes there's also a level of comfort where, since the students know their speaking skills aren't that good yet, that they feel nervous and don't want to do it as much because they're not that good at it just yet. And so, since they're better at writing, even having them write responses, but then instead of just turning them into you or sending them to you, have them actually say it. So that then they start to, they can at least write the sentence, something they're more comfortable with. They can develop the language, but then have them say it so that they become more comfortable with actually speaking in English. And then you can start to, as they get more comfortable, start to kind of up the level of difficulty, where instead of you writing it out first or going over things that you've already written, now let's have a more authentic conversation where I'll try to throw something in there and you just respond. That's something else you might try.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I see, Angie, I see your hand, and I think there's maybe been one question in the chat, maybe that I missed. Yeah. Oh, okay. Andrea asked, and this, okay, Andrea asked, do you know if curriculum is provided to those of us who are beginning with practicum? I would say that depends, I think, on where you do your practicum. I'm going to say in most cases, at least through My Culture Connect and some other maybe tutoring, usually you're coming up with some of those things that you're doing as far as the curriculum goes, or at least the lesson planning. Maybe curriculum, you might have some topics that you know are should be covered, and so you at least have a general outline of the types of things you should cover, but then it's more up to you to do the lesson planning. And I would say that for your practicum, that's probably the better situation to be in. You really want to get using that practicum actually as the practice of building those lesson plans. And because when we do it in the ITA program, we do write a lot of lesson plans, but it's kind of theoretical, and or hypothetical, I should say, where it's like you put this thing together, you put some times on it, and you're like, okay, here's my lesson plan, but you don't actually use it with real students. And so that's really a key part to that practicum. And I know that maybe if you get to do a practicum somewhere where the lessons are already developed or they already have the curriculum, that makes it a little easier on you. But I would challenge you to go ahead and try to get those opportunities to make lesson plans and use them in a real teaching environment. Yeah. And then Another question: if we're teaching them to speak their native language, me for example with Spanish, would you say it's okay to incorporate their native language? Oh, okay. Okay, so the question is from Andrea, if you're tutoring or teaching someone in a native language that you also speak, so for in her instance, Spanish, she speaks Spanish, her students are native Spanish speakers, is it okay to incorporate their native language in order to help them understand? Um, I would say in this case, oh yeah, oh Mike, Mike is
Wait,
waving.
wait just a minute. When you're done, I have something to add to that.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, and this might I don't know, it might be contradictory because I've actually mostly taught in a full immersion sort of class environment where I've always been expected, not just by choice, but the expectation has been that I give all direction in English. So I think that it really, if you're in a tutoring situation, I think it really depends on your student and how you can incorporate that into your lessons. Yes, is there a benefit to maybe with some difficult concepts giving them an example of that in Spanish and then showing so that they can kind of, oh, relate the two? I think so. But I also think that there have been plenty of studies and plenty of real life scenarios that show us that full immersion and when you're just get yourself out there and start using the language is a more effective way overall to learn a language. So I think you kind of have to weigh that out with, I would say, trying to minimize that. But if there's an area where you're like, I could really, like, the student is just almost there, if I could just connect the pieces, then you might use a little Spanish in those situations. Mike, what did you
Oh,
think?
I was just thinking. My experience has been with Mandarin, and one of the things. First of all, I look at language as functional rather than thinking about grammar and correct English. So I always accept functional speech from my Mandarin students. But what I do is I do incorporate a little bit of Mandarin. And sometimes I do it in this regard. I don't speak Mandarin very well at all, but I know a little bit of it. I try to make sure my students understand how difficult Mandarin is for me. And I will sometimes ask them to help me with something in Mandarin, maybe something simple that I know how to say but not pronounce properly. And my reason for doing that is I just sense that if they realize that I have difficulties too, but I'm willing to try and I'm willing to embarrass myself a little bit, that perhaps they will feel a little more comfortable. Because the secret, as Quentin has said, is to get them speaking. Get them speaking. Um, you want to make them comfortable as best you can, but showing that you're a human being too. You know, wow, I can introduce myself in Mandarin, and when I do it, if I'm in Taiwan, I get a wonderful reception because I've tried. So there's ways to build rapport that way too. One of the things with the students I find in Taiwan is that they're just naturally shy. Their culture is much more humble than ours, much, much more humble. And to understand that, you know, I go out amongst them. You can't very well do that on screen, but if I'm in Taiwan, I'm right down in with the students. I'm right down there kneeling in front of them, very close. And I'm cautious. You know, you don't touch people, but they'll hug me all the time. Now, Luke would laugh. He says, Mike, you can get away with that. You're an old white haired man. You know, maybe if you were 35, 40 years old, you ought not to do that. But, you know, it's anyway, try a little Mandarin. Just pick up or ask for help. Hey, I want to know how to say hello. How are you in Mandarin? And then stumble over it. You know, I don't understand the four tones. Wow. You know, help me. Anything to get them feeling a little with you and realizing that you're a human being too. This is difficult work.
No.
What Quentin, you can, I always fall back on earlier when you were talking, I was falling back in my mind on the Chinese saying, the classic saying that the longest journey begins with the smallest step. That's all you're doing. You're just trying to get these kids to take a step.
Absolutely. That's such good advice, Mike, because I think that building rapport is so essential. And that's a very good way to do it, is showing that, we too learning a language is
Yeah.
difficult. It's difficult. And and actually I haven't learned Mandarin, but I'm currently working on learning Spanish. So then even just learning a different language, you realize, wow, this is not that easy, even with a language that maybe some would say is similar, or at least has similar sort of patterns. It's so much different than speaking Mandarin or some other languages where it's so different than English.
If you're dealing with Mandarin, one of the things that they when I'm in Taiwan, most everyone knows me not as Mike, but as Mike or Ye, which is, of course, Grandpa Mike in Mandarin. And so I really quickly learned how to do the characters. I can write my name, Grandpa Mike, in Mandarin. And, there's something you can do. Figure your name, they will be able to tell you, or ask them to give you a Chinese name if you're dealing with Mandarin. Or I suppose if you're dealing with Spanish, maybe a Spanish name. And then learn how to write that in Spanish or in Mandarin. And then exhibit that. Show them, hey, I can write my name in Mandarin. I can write Micah Ye. So, I think all of that familiarity, that warmness, there's a warmth that comes from doing those kinds of things. If you could see my room here, you'd find out I'm surrounded by Chinese. Everything around me is Chinese, and I do that on purpose. They talk about, I don't know if you can see my background or not, but let me bring it up so you can see it. I think you can. Yeah. Anyway, my background, of course, shows me playing in the schoolyard in Changhua with a bunch of kids. They're teaching me how to use the Chinese yo-yo. But I think just your background, if you're teaching Mandarin, figure out how to write your name in Mandarin and put it on a big sign and put it behind you. So when you're working with the kids, I see my culture there. There's visual things are very important, I think. So, and here's what I have discovered. I've told Luke this, and it's amazing. I can be in Changhua, Taichung, or someplace, and everybody can be speaking Mandarin except me. And I will pick up very little of it, but I am completely comfortable. No uneasy feelings. I think part of the reason is I've surrounded myself with so much of their culture that it seems normal. It's just natural. So again, I notice in the background, Sarah, you got all kinds of white in the background. How cool that would be if you had that all colored up in whatever you were doing, or just, this is just what Japanese, what do you call it?
Mike. I totally need to work on a cool background. I was looking at some of your backgrounds. They're awesome.
Yeah, I would suggest that, especially, and say, I should tell you, with your smile, you've won half the battle already, because you've got such a beautiful smile that the kids are going to love you. I can tell you right now.
You can get a background, Sarah, from Amazon.
Yeah, so you've got a very colorful. Yeah.
Yeah, I bought mine from Amazon because my goal was to teach kindergarten. Hi, Quentin. I went to a couple of your classes and I've completed my practicum. And I took the summer off helping Luke doing some tutoring. Mm-hmm. Really great, mostly one-on-one. I'm doing a Saturday morning tutoring right now. I think she's close enough to high school. And as far as you were asking about speaking with, some of the stuff that I do is will read and I'll have them say a sentence. And if they're not saying it correctly, instead of keep on moving on, look at my mouth, repeat the words, and help them understand the story slowly. Um, some of the stuff that I've been blessed, thanks, Luke, most of my kids do understand the English. The last one we're struggling with, my understanding they do English for testing, but some of them just don't understand the concept. So that's what we're kind of working through right now, not just to speak, but understand that if you came to the United States. So the last two students we had an imaginary trip to Disney. I'm in Florida. So we pull some Disney and Who Little Mermaid and so we walk through Disney World. Kids love Disney. And they were able to explain what they wanted to do, go on the rides and stuff like that. And then this last one, we did a cultural exchange. So they had to provide me with little tidbits of who they are, what the country, what they like, the food. And I did my cultural exchange as a Jamaican American and some of the stuff, and we pull pictures. So my question for you now is that, as promised, Lou, I took the summer off to help doing some tutoring, and I'm looking now to move into the employment state of, now that I have my license, my certification. What's your recommendation? I want to stay still with Luke because I enjoy my students that I have, but to pull in a couple paying student, how did you get started? Where would you start other than VIP kids?
Yes, yes. Great question. I think before I get to your question, I just want to say, Angie, those were fantastic lesson ideas. I absolutely love the idea of the Walt Disney World trip and taking a virtual and like talking about going on rides and things. And I want to just kind of link that to Sarah's question, and that if you find a topic or a lesson that the kids will naturally be interested in just because it is their interest, like Disney, like if you discover something that they like to do, maybe they play a sport, maybe they do some different activities, movies that are currently out. If you find those types of topics, then it just will make them more enthused, and it'll get them motivated even more to use the language, because now we're doing something fun and interesting. So that's just always something else to do. As for your question, so some things that I did, and I also do I do work for the VIP Kid and Magic Gear, so some of those larger companies. Something else that you could try, I think, is some of the tutoring, I won't call them platforms, it's more of a marketplace. So there are some of those like Preply is one. I think is it Cambio? I'm not as familiar with Cambio, but I think that is also one. These are places where you essentially set up a profile, and then it's for tutoring. There's a mix of students, both adults, and there are some children. I know you were saying kindergarten. I haven't seen children that young yet on that there might be, but most of them are usually teenagers and
Right.
above that I've known. But those are options, especially if you want to stay online or just have the flexibility of working online, which is primarily what I've been doing just because of the
Yes.
pandemic and so on and so
Mm-hmm.
forth. But those are two suggestions if you're not looking to do some of that, because those are ones where I like Preply also because they do have some lessons and some materials and things that you can work with that you can just supplement with your own materials. So that's a good one. You set your own rate, and then Preply takes a commission to be on their platform. So there's that aspect of it. But that would be a recommendation that I know of, that something where you could be kind of in a tutoring space, but not
Mm-hmm.
so much the kind of VIP kid or magic ears, those types of setups.
Okay.
Hmm.
I was Quentin, I was just thinking, I don't recall the names anymore, but there are at least two large companies out of mainland China that recruit for people all the time. A number of years ago, I queried from one of them, and I know the gentleman interviewed me right on screen, but they were paying somewhere between 12 and $24 an hour, and they provided the curriculum. It was really a boxed curriculum that you just took their work and you were the native English speaker. So I forget, one of them may be the VIP kids, or I don't remember the names, but I think if you go on Google and you search for tutoring opportunities teaching English to Chinese children, by way of example, you'll get those big company names.
There's a lot of them. I'm just very cautious with I'm not saying fake scam or real, but I would much rather utilize someone that ITA use or like, Luke says this company, or like you give me that, because once you get started and put your personal information out, or you do this and it turned out that it's not real, I would much rather I know VIP Kids are Magic, and while we're doing classes, I know Preply was one. So as I go out now, that's why I wanted to know what was your recommendation that one is legit, and two, you do have the opportunity to continue to teach. I'm not leaving you, Luke. I'm not leaving you.
Yeah, and Angie, the two that I know that you said besides VIP Kid, but I have experience with four: VIP Kid, Magic Ears, Bling ABC, and Preply, and all four of those are reputable companies. VIP Kid actually has offices also in San Francisco. I mean, they're headquartered in mainland China, but they also have offices in San Francisco, so they also have like an American extension. Yeah, so they definitely are. Oh, someone said Go Go Kid. So I know those four, and we do just a separate note, but if anyone on this call is interested in potentially working for any of those major companies, specifically VIP Kid, Magic Ears, Bling ABC, or Preply, we are My Culture Connect is having a webinar series that starts this Saturday, 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and it will be a series that kind of takes you through some of the different aspects of working for these companies. So just kind of giving you an overview of them, pros and cons, the hiring process, how you get paid and how you book classes, and so that you can kind of have a better idea
Exactly.
of what some of these are, and if they fit for your teaching style or how you wish to teach. And
And you
so
start this Saturday.
it starts this Saturday. I will throw some information in the chat at the end of this session, which will give you all of the times, the topics, and those will be every Saturday in August. 10 a.m. Central Time.
Perfect.
Yep.
Thank you.
And the links for those, just so you know, the links for those can be found on the observation schedule that Luke sends out. So just where you would go observe classes, you will find the links for those there as well.
Okay.
Okay. And Armand, go ahead. I see you raise your hand.
Yes. Hi, there we go. Okay. So I had two questions actually. I'm planning on teaching primarily online overseas, either in Vietnam, Cambodia, China, someplace like that, just so I can travel, see parts of the world, and still earn a living and doing something I enjoy. Um, so my first question is, a typical online class, could it range, how many students would I be looking at? Anywhere from 1 to 15, 10, or does it depend on the school and their curriculum, or how does that work? That's my first question.
Yeah, well, let's start there. So this would be a great topic that we'll talk about on the webinar, but a brief thing for you. It is going to depend on the company. So
Okay.
just out of those four that I mentioned, VIP Kid is one-on-one, so it'll always be you and one other student. Magic Ears is a one-on-four setup. Now they always usually have four kids that are invited to class. Sometimes you have no shows, so you may end up teaching just two or three, but it's a one-on-four setup. Bling ABC is the one that has the most that I know of. So you can do anything from a 1 to 4 setup all the way up to like I think a 1 to 20, where it's like a really large class and you cycle through students. And so that could be a very large class that you would teach. And now these are just on the platforms that, on some of the platforms, of course, there are many, many more, but just some of the platforms that are all about teaching online. Now, you could also maybe get opportunities similar to My Culture Connect or other places where you might be a teaching assistant or a co-teacher for a teacher who is live on location somewhere. And so in that case, you may be supporting a teacher who's working with a classroom full of students. But it definitely is dependent on the company
Okay.
that you work for, what their kind of setup is.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. That helps. My second question is, since I am teaching primarily online, with going with an online company, say let's use China for example. If I want to teach for, um, I don't know any companies' names in China, but let's say uh, Mandarin English Connect in China, and it's online. Would I still be able to go live in that country and teach online without going into a school? I mean,
Yeah.
is that okay?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying there. So now this is also going to be country dependent on what the visa in process is in that
Okay.
place. But the catch is that when you work for these online companies, so I'm speaking just for if you're an American citizen using the American tax code. So if we have people from other places, this may not apply to you. Check your jurisdiction. But speaking from America, then so you work for these companies as an independent contractor, and so it doesn't matter where you are living, your as long as you can get the visa for there. So for instance, if you go to China, I haven't looked into moving to China, but if you go there and you're on a tourist visa, however long that will last you, then you can work online and you're just an independent contractor and your tax liability is going to be to however you would pay your taxes in America.
Okay.
That's currently what I do I live in Mexico currently,
Okay.
in Puerto Vallarta. And so the companies that I work for, I'm an independent contractor. I still owe taxes as I would if I were doing independent contractor work. Like let's say I worked for Uber or I worked for Lyft, something like that. I still owe taxes on that money as I would if I worked for one of those companies. I just physically live in Mexico on my tourist visa. Now, with that though comes a little bit of it depends on what you're willing to do. So for me in Mexico, the tourist visa lasts 6 months. I do have to leave the country, go on a visa run, so to speak, where I
Okay.
leave the country for a period of time and come back. For Mexico, super easy. They don't have any requirements as far as how long you have to leave the country for. So I can literally, I go back to visit family or something for a weekend or a holiday and come back to Mexico, I get another 6 months.
Okay.
Whereas a place like maybe the EU, I know with European Union, they have a 90-day within 180-day policy. So
Okay.
therefore, you only get 3 months and you only get 3 months within a 6 month period. So therefore, if you were there for 3 solid months, you would have to leave for at least 3 months before you could come back into the European Union. So a
Now,
lot of that depends on jurisdiction, where you want to go.
now to piggyback on that a little bit, that's something that the ITA guidance department may be able to assist me with at the end of my semester, my term once I've graduated. Then, okay,
Absolutely.
okay,
Absolutely. And they are really good and have a lot of resources for that.
okay.
And so definitely take a look. I know that it's a lot, which is a good thing, but sometimes can be overwhelming. But there are so many resources that the ITA provides. Anything from giving you those country guides where you can see a quick description of what the vising process is like for a tourist visa, how long you get in the country versus getting a work visa, that kind of situation.
Okay.
But in most places, I won't speak for everywhere, but in most places, The part that gets you in visa trouble is if you're actually making money and earning money for like in the country that you're in.
Right.
So if I were to start putting flyers up out here on the street saying tutoring for English, 200 pesos an hour, then I'm earning money. I'm earning a living
Okay.
in Mexico, and
Okay.
then that's what can get me in trouble.
Understood.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. That was very helpful. Appreciate that.
Great questions tonight, everyone. This has been such a good conversation.
So I have another question. It's kind of going back to the lesson planning. So I find, and I feel like if I was teaching more than one student, it might be easier to stick to the plan. But I feel like when I'm tutoring, I will create this awesome plan and, with the PPP format. And then when I get started, I feel like we're all over the place. And sometimes we don't get very far. It'll take us like 3 times to finish one plan. And I'm having issues with like sticking to the plan and keeping them like focused.
Well, I have one question. In
It's
the
real.
times when you don't stick to the plan, are they still learning something, or is it still something that is necessary? So you said for one thing, like you may pick an activity and you spend so much longer on it than you intended. But was that productive time? Are they still learning something? Is it still a benefit to them? Because if the answer is yes, then
You're
don't
doing it.
change anything. Then
You
just
are.
because the plan is a plan. It's all it is. It's a plan, it's a guide. It's there to make sure that you have something to do in class. But if you get on a topic and it just explodes into a whole discussion, or it's just you're just going and you're moving, or maybe with your students, since you've had some problems getting them to speak, maybe they're on an activity and they're just going. They are just really loving this one and they're talking, they're speaking. You can
Quentin,
always come back to that lesson plan a different time.
Quentin, that is the most important thing I believe that you have said all night, and everything you're saying is important. Sarah, that's the best advice I could give you. I would just simply parrot him, and I've been doing this stuff for over 50 years.
Just do it. In my classroom, when I was teaching, I had my lesson plans. I had everything structured, not online, in a regular brick and mortar school. I used to teach in a public school. And I walk in the classroom in the morning, lesson planning attack. Somebody have an attitude attack, or don't remember the homework, or da 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 da, and the plan go out. But we still got work done. And there are times where I had to adjust my plans and say, okay, we're not going to read. And then we start discuss. We start go through. So sometimes the plans, keep in mind, your plans are your guide. That's what it's supposed to do. Guide you as you go along. Try to stay on there. But like I said, I know the day when we were talking about Disney, that was not the plan. But we went on the ride and she told me how far on those merry-go-round, and I am scared. And we end up with a conversation which got her speaking, which was not really what was part of the plan.
Getting 1/3 of the way through a lesson and doing a good job is much better than making sure you get through the whole lesson. And excuse my French, doing a half-assed job.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now if you, and I think I saw you kind of nodding your head about the if it's still a productive lesson or if they're still doing things. If you find that you maybe aren't being able to accomplish some goals that you have in class, or you aren't being able to get through something because maybe there's a time management issue in that way, that's a little bit of a different problem if that's what you feel that's happening. And in that case, I would say taking some time back to maybe really look at and get to know the types of activities you're doing. So for me, I know that like in my lesson planning, there are just some activities that I just know from history. I'm a bad time. I just can't time them right. I'm always off. Either I plan it, so I just know this. And once I have that in my head, I know, okay, Quentin, you already know this is a speaking thing and it's not going to go in this time. So just add a little bit less, take a little bit off, and just keep kind of tweaking it to each student and into the people that you're teaching. But I think it sounds to me that you are having productive lessons, maybe just not getting through everything you had planned. And that's okay. And there's always the next lesson. Luke has been very instrumental in this with me. And because I used to have the same sort of thing of I felt almost like a failure, like, oh man, like I planned this whole thing out. But there's always the next lesson. If you had a speaking activity and two writing activities and you only got through speaking, next class or next tutoring session, we're going to start with that writing activity. And then it doesn't go to waste. And save all of your lesson plans. I know this wasn't your question, but definitely um, put them on a Google Drive, have them in folders, name them by the topic. I was really bad at this before where I would put the date, like, October 12th, and that would be my folder. Don't do that. Put it by the topic, past simple, whatever, so that you can easily find them because you will use them again. You will use them again.
Oh, kind of one question off that. So my students, they're actually teachers, and I don't know, I feel like they're a little bit advanced, just not as advanced with speaking and listening. So I feel like a lot of times I'm like kind of lost at where to, like, what level to develop the plan at. But more than that, I feel like I'm not focusing on my grammar points. Would you recommend making every lesson focused on a grammar point rather than like a topic?
Absolutely not, from my perspective. Absolutely not. That was one of the first things. One of my basic rules is functionality. Language is communications, first and foremost. The grammar and syntax are secondary. Focus on the communications. That's me. That's my idea. Doesn't make me correct, but that's how I do it.
Yeah, and I think Mike, I think that's absolutely. I say yeah, the same thing. When we talk about fluency over accuracy, the fluency in being able to communicate an idea, and even if it's not 100% exactly by every grammar rule, is going to be much more useful for your student. Now, I would say though, depending on, there is a time where you might need to focus on some grammar, specifically if you're since especially in a lot of the Asian markets, there is a very intense pressure on English examinations and preparing for examinations. And so if you're tutoring a student who wants your help in exam prep or something of that nature, that would be, I would think, the only time that I would say you might have to really focus on those grammar points because they're going to be getting tested on those. But if you're just working with someone who wants to be more conversational, who wants to be able to communicate with others using English, then the grammar itself is not nearly as important as communicating those ideas.
Let me tell you something. I'll talk about a little egg on my face. I'm a published writer. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm often published in local newspapers, and 3 or 4 times over the years, I've been published in outdoor magazines with survival skills or other type of articles I've written. So I write quite a lot, and I'm always editing English for people from Taiwan, by way of example. The ITA, after I got all of those certificates, I took every class they had to get a certificate, so I would be TEFL certified. There were 4, but maybe there were 3, and then they come out with a 4th one just recently. It's called grammar. It's English grammar. I thought, I got to take that. I spent whatever, $150 or whatever. I took English grammar. Guess what my grade was?
Tell us.
C, a very even
Oh.
C. And My wife said, Mike, you never get C's. I'm here to tell you, I had a hell of a time with that English grammar class. It just, but I write quite well. Luke can tell you that. I write with him all the time. you know, incidentally, folks, for what it's worth, my English teacher is Luke Lynn. His standard English is probably better than mine. His textbook English. So I joke when I always tell the kids when I'm in Taiwan, hey, who's Grandpa Mike's English teacher? And they say, who? I say, Luker.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I feel like I'm finding it's more about fluency unless you're doing something really specific. It's all about fluency. And I did my grammar class with the course that I took, and I was shocked at how many things I didn't remember. So,
Exactly.
yeah, I get it. It's tough.
And I think a lot of times what I will do too, if you've been watching some of my classes, actually tonight's class or on the Monday night class, we've been going through conditionals, which is a grammar topic. But what I've tried to do is you might teach it as a grammar topic, but then I try to make the activities more about how we actually use that grammar topic and start to form sentences and scenarios and things of that nature so that it's less about it is the past simple plus have plus a participle. It's not so much, you don't have to really know that. But now here's a situation where you would use this. Like, let's talk about things that are improbable. Let's talk about things that didn't happen, but if they did happen, we could say so then you start bringing up the scenarios that you can use those things in to make it more conversational, even if you have like a grammar point that you want to kind of touch on. Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Quentin, let me tell you, I've been doing a lot of study of writing, and I'm coming to the conclusion from my reading that the average person in America, whether they be college educated or not, likes things written at a 10th grade level. At a 10th grade level, and that's all of us. So I keep telling people if I'm asked to edit something, the first thing I do is try to take out as many words out of the sentences as I can and to make them as short and as simple as possible. Because what you really want to do is you want to capture people's interest. That means keeping them on task. The longer, the more clauses, the more commas, the more phrases, the less they're going to read. Start by getting directly to your point initially so they know what the point is, and then keep it as simple as possible. That's another general rule that I think works very well. We tend to think that if we're going to be an English teacher, by way of example, that we need to be very sophisticated. I don't think so. Keep it simple and to the point.
I like that. I think one thing I'm finding I have trouble with is I speak very fast. And I also maybe talk too much. What are your guys' thoughts and tips on that?
I'm a trained psychotherapist. Counseling was my main function over the years. And my rule of thumb is this, and I have to be careful when I'm in a place like this because I want to tell people things. If I am talking more than the other person, then something is wrong. The rule of thumb that I learned was very careful. If you are talking more than the other person, you are not doing a good job.
I think I tend to speak faster as well. And one thing that I've tried to do is even not sometimes it's not so much of slowing down every single word, but putting pauses in between sentences. So even though I might say a sentence at a fairly normal rate, really stopping before I go on to the next sentence, just to give your student time to absorb. Because think about what they have to do. They have to hear it, translate it to whatever language in their mind, think of how to say it in their language, translate it in their mind back, and then produce something. So if they're listening, they're doing a lot of translating. So just to give their minds time to catch up. So sometimes it's not so much about I need to slow down every word. It's just you need to put gaps in between your sentences so they can catch up in their heads.
And I
That's
think, Luke, I'm sorry, I think, Quentin, the other thing to keep in mind is as you speak, let's say a sentence or two, you want to pause and make sure the student understood what you said. So maybe a quick question, understood, or ask them something to make sure they not only heard what you said, but they comprehend and can tell you or somewhere what you said, and then therefore did they get what you were talking about. So not the whole story, but a couple sentences, especially when it has the idea and the thought that you want them to get from those 2 or 3 sentences. One, to see if they're paying attention, but two, more importantly, is you don't want to get to the end of the story and they had no idea where you were in the beginning. So each page, let's say each page of that book, you do a recap, and that way by the time you get to the end of the book, both you and the student will be on the same page. So it's not necessarily you speaking fast would be my concern, because I tend sometimes to do that. However, I always, like Quentin say, pause and then ask a question to summarize. Did they understand what we just discussed?
I would add the pause is important if you're both native English speakers. That pause they're talking about is important no matter any conversation you have, including in the same language.
Thanks, guys.
Oh, one other thing I guess I can add to that, and this one is more difficult and takes a little bit of thought, I think, but also just trying to reduce a little bit of the incidental type of language that we kind of feel at the end of a sentence, or that you say in between sentences, and not just like the ums, or but even things kind of like, oh, like, I just did it. See, even things kind of like, and then so because that just makes there be more words and makes your sentence longer, and for a non-speaker of that language, it's hard to discern what was the actual point of the sentence and what was just extra language that was unnecessary, but you said it anyways. They think the entire sentence was necessary.
Important.
Yeah, exactly.
So, a question. What tips would you have for limiting teacher talk time?
Oh, limiting teacher talk time. Um, what I try to do is I think just trying to up your lessons. And so even in the presentation mode, trying not to present for too much time at once, breaking it up to do those things like Angie said, checking for understanding, having times where you will have examples where they have to tell you, give you an example, or even when I'm presenting, if I know that I'm presenting for a while, I'll have the students read the slide, or like, okay, well, how about you read the first sentence? And so that then it's, even though we're looking at a slide and I'm presenting information, it also gets them speaking and reading, and I can also check for pronunciation of words. And so there definitely is a purpose for having them read something, even if you're presenting information, having them read the example or give an example. That can also help you a practical reason, not just about limiting your own talk time. But definitely trying not to go for too long of a span when you're explaining things, mixing in those. Well, how about okay, so we did that. Give me an example of that. How about could you read this for me? Those are ways to keep the students going and involved, limiting your talk time, and then also just keeping them fresh and on there so that they don't get too kind of tunneled and they kind of check out when we're speaking too much. But that would be a good way that I think I've used, is just trying to mix in those questions, have them read parts, those types of things.
Now, with that, let's say they're reading a slide or reading part of the presentation for you there. And of course, their grammar may not be on point. They may skip a few things here or switch words around. Should we correct them on that, or just kind of let it go and be happy that they're making the attempt?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things for that. When I'm having them read something where it's like a very specific read this sentence, those are
Okay.
times when I will let the student read the sentence and then correct it after they've read it. And then they can go back and try to re-say the words if it was a pronunciation thing or if they missed some words, they can go back and try to reread that sentence.
Okay.
So I will do some correction there. Now, the time where sometimes I won't do a lot of correction, or at least not until the end, is when you're doing things like conversational type things where you're having them answer something for you or respond to a question or be in a conversation, because then I don't want to like break their stride of
Right.
like stopping them in the middle of a thought to correct them on something. Go ahead and let them finish what their thoughts are, let them get it all out, and then we can kind of make little notes as they're talking, and then we can go back and talk about what they said as a whole, and
Got it.
talk about different ways that they could have done better.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Well, we've come. This was a very quick hour. It flew
It sure
by.
was.
But not to worry. This is not our last office hour. These are going to be, they're a regular occurrence. We're keeping those up. So the next one will be on Wednesday, same time. So 6:30 Central, 7:30 Eastern. And that will be on Wednesday. And so please, if there are any other questions, or if you just want to come to hear what people are asking, hear the discussion, feel free to drop in on Wednesday. And of course, continue to check the observation schedule. We will be posting additional office hours as the weeks go by. And again, you can also check out the information for the webinar starting Saturday, which I'm going to post in the chat. All right.
Perfect. Thanks, Quentin.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye bye.
Happy
Thank you very
teaching.
much. Have a great day. Great night.
Thank you.